You're not needed anymore.
Adrian Locke never imagined the moment he'd be betrayed would happen under blinding boardroom lights, with the city skyline glittering behind the glass like a silent audience. One minute, he was the man who helped build Heliovantage Solutions from the ground up. The next, his wife Serena and her sister Tessa, faces once familiar, now carved in cold ambition, were voting to fire him in front of the entire board. No warning, no explanation, just a polished announcement that his services were no longer required. Security walked him out while Serena avoided his eyes, and Tessa smirked like she'd already won a war he never knew they were fighting. But what none of them realized, Adrian had quietly taken something with him, something that could unravel everything they'd done. If you're watching this, tell me your city and what time it is right now, and make sure to subscribe for more stories just like this. Adrian Locke had always believed that every great fall started as a quiet, almost invisible ripple, long before the boardroom lights scorched his pride, before Serena's voice turned cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. There were moments, small, delicate shifts in the air, that hinted something dangerous was taking shape beneath the surface, but he hadn't seen it. Or maybe he hadn't allowed himself to. Love, after all, had a way of blinding even the sharpest minds. Years earlier, before Heliovantage towered above Brighton Falls, Adrian had been just another ambitious analyst doing his best to stay afloat in a world that moved too fast. He'd been invited to a charity tech event held at Riverside Hall, a place with chandeliers that looked like molten stars, frozen mid-fall, because he'd helped a startup streamline their distribution systems for free. Hard work, integrity, and a little luck had gotten him through the door. But nothing prepared him for the moment he saw Serena Ward across the room. She wasn't radiant in the obvious way. Her beauty worked differently, more like warmth than fire, a presence that softened every sharp corner of the hall. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark curls pulled into a loose twist that left a few strands drifting around her face. And she smiled at people with real interest, not the hollow politeness Adrian often saw in networking circles. She caught his eye once, and he looked away too quickly, embarrassed, unprepared, strangely shaken. He didn't know then that the moment she crossed the room to introduce herself would become a dividing line in his life. The time before Serena, and everything after. Serena's conversation felt effortless, like finding a familiar melody in a place he'd never been. They talked about logistics automation, charity infrastructure, and her father's company Heliovantage. She spoke with a spark when she described Gregory Ward, a man she clearly admired. Adrian listened, fascinated by the fire in her voice, the depth of her loyalty. He would later realize that loyalty, when twisted, could become something far more dangerous. It was near the end of that evening when Serena's younger sister appeared, Tessa Ward. She was nothing like Serena. Where Serena was warm, Tessa was sharp. Where Serena listened, Tessa calculated. Even her smile felt like a blade polished to a shine. Adrian introduced himself politely, and Tessa's eyes flicked up and down as if she were scanning a resume she hadn't requested. "So you're the analyst Serena's been talking to," she said. "Interesting." It wasn't a compliment. Later, he would remember that look, assessing, dismissive, mildly amused, as the very first warning he never registered. Serena and Adrian grew close quickly. They met for coffee at hidden corners of the city, shared dreams about creating something meaningful, and laughed about the strange, unspoken hierarchy of tech culture. Serena was genuine, vulnerable, and curious about his ideas. She introduced him to Gregory, who invited him to tour Heliovantage's modest office the following week. Gregory Ward was a force without needing to raise his voice. In his late 60s, with silver hair and tired eyes that still carried the fire of a builder, he recognized something in Adrian that others often overlooked: substance. That day, As Adrian walked Gregory through an idea for optimizing Heliovantage's delivery routing, Gregory tapped his cane lightly and said, "Son, you don't belong behind a desk. You belong in rooms where decisions shape futures." That sentence would become the cornerstone of their bond. Gregory began mentoring him, giving him opportunities to test his ideas, pushing him to grow. Soon, Adrian was no longer an outsider. He was part of the heartbeat of the company, and every late-night strategy meeting with Gregory felt like stepping deeper into a place that finally felt like home. But not everyone was pleased. Tessa's comments, at first small and disguised as jokes, began appearing frequently whenever the three of them were in the same room. "Climbing fast, aren't we, Serena? Maybe you should date someone less talented. He might steal the company one day. Funny how Dad trusts him more than his own daughters." Serena brushed them off, calling Tessa overprotective or dramatic. But Adrian sometimes caught the flicker of unease in her expression. Still, he ignored it. They were young, in love, dreaming of a shared future. They announced their engagement at a family dinner, and Gregory's smile, proud and sincere, meant more to Adrian than he ever admitted. Their wedding took place at Maple Crest Chapel, a small stone building surrounded by pale blossoms that fell like confetti in the wind. Serena looked breathtaking walking down the aisle, her eyes full of hope. Adrian remembered gripping her hands and thinking nothing could ever shake the world they were building together. But he didn't see the moment afterward when Tessa pulled Serena aside, their heads bowed close, Tessa's jaw set tight. He didn't see the tension, the warning, or the first threads of ambition winding themselves into Serena's heart. Time passed, and Heliovantage grew faster, stronger, more stable than ever before. The company moved into Aurora Plaza, a sleek glass tower reflecting the sky. Adrian became the mind behind the operation, the architect who took Gregory's dreams and gave them structure. Serena joined the marketing division, becoming the polished public face of Heliovantage. And Tessa had left for an MBA abroad, a decision that felt less like departure and more like preparation. When Gregory collapsed unexpectedly in his office, the company was thrust into crisis. Adrian stepped up without hesitation, coordinating departments, stabilizing operations, and keeping Heliovantage afloat while Gregory recovered. Serena supported him publicly, though privately, she began asking quiet, uncertain questions about risk and responsibility. Tessa returned home swiftly, sliding into the role of protector before anyone realized what she was doing. Whispers began to reach Adrian in fragments, board discussions he wasn't invited to, memos that bypassed him, data summaries, missing key details. He tried to dismiss them as organizational strain during Gregory's illness. But the subtle shift in Serena's expressions, soft concern, mingling with something harder, unsettled him. One night, Serena sat across from him at their townhouse on Linden Row, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug she hadn't touched. She spoke carefully, asking if he was hiding financial issues, if he'd been overextending, if maybe he was no longer seeing the full picture. Her questions weren't accusatory, but they were influenced, shaped by someone else's narrative. "Tessa's just worried," Serena said at one point. "She thinks you're taking on too much, that you might be missing signs." Adrian felt something inside him falter. Not because Serena doubted him, he understood fear, uncertainty, but because Tessa's voice had seeped into his marriage in ways he hadn't expected. He kissed Serena's forehead and assured her everything was under control. But as he lay awake that night, staring into the dark, a thought settled into his chest like ice. Someone was positioning him as a problem. Someone was quietly rearranging pieces he hadn't noticed. He told himself he would watch more closely. He promised himself he would be careful. But even then, even with unease settling in his bones, Adrian had no idea how far the betrayal would go, or how meticulously it was already being crafted. By the time Heliovantage officially unveiled its new headquarters in the shimmering Aurora Plaza, the building itself seemed to symbolize everything Adrian had poured into the company. Years of sleepless nights, relentless innovation, and an almost stubborn belief that integrity could still shape the corporate world. Standing in the lobby on opening day, watching employees marvel at the glass atrium and the hum of new systems coming online, he felt a quiet pride settle over him. It wasn't ownership in the legal sense. It was ownership of spirit. He had helped build this. But pride has a way of blinding even the most perceptive people. What Adrian didn't see, what he couldn't see, was how the same polished glass walls that reflected his accomplishments were also reflecting the ambitions of others, ambitions sharpened by proximity to power. Gregory Ward's health had been declining quietly for months. Long before his collapse in the office, Adrian remembered the moment vividly. Gregory gripping the edge of his desk, the tremor in his voice as he asked Adrian to call Serena, the ambulance lights flashing against the building at dusk. Serena's face drained of color. Tessa's arrival, 20 minutes later, brisk and composed. Already giving orders, Gregory survived the incident, but the diagnosis was sobering, a condition that wasn't immediately life-threatening, but required rest, reduced stress, and careful medication. In his absence, the company needed a stabilizing force. Employees looked to Adrian. Vendors trusted him. Even the board, initially cautious, leaned on him for operational continuity. Adrian stepped into that role naturally, quietly, and without any desire for spotlight. He simply did what needed to be done. But his steady rise was not welcomed by everyone. With Gregory sidelined, power dynamics inside Heliovantage shifted with startling speed. Serena continued managing marketing and communications, ensuring the public remained unaware of Gregory's condition. She presented herself as calm, polished, and deeply committed to preserving her father's legacy. Tessa, however, had returned from her MBA program, transformed. She had always been sharp. Now she was sharp with intent. She joined the company under the title Strategic Development Director, a role vague enough to grant her access to nearly everything and obscure enough to avoid accountability. From the moment she stepped into the office, Adrian felt something in the atmosphere tighten. Conversations quieted when he walked into rooms. Reports began arriving at his desk later than usual. He received summaries instead of full data packets. Decisions he thought had been agreed upon shifted slightly by the time they reached the board. At first, he chalked it up to growing pains, the natural chaos that happens when leadership enters crisis mode. But then came the board meeting. It was meant to be a routine check-in. As Gregory recovered, Adrian had prepared detailed updates, financials stabilizing, supply chain issues minimized, new logistics software showing promising results. Yet when he arrived, he noticed two things immediately. Serena and Tessa were already seated at the head of the table, and several board members avoided his eyes. Evelyn Stone, one of the senior board members known for her measured approach, greeted him politely but distractedly. Howard Kane, an old friend of Gregory's, gave him a reassuring nod, but one that carried a hint of concern, as though he knew something Adrian didn't. The meeting began, and Adrian prepared to present until Tessa interrupted. "We'll start with a different update today," she said smoothly, as though this had been decided beforehand. "We've identified some inconsistencies in our operational planning that require urgent attention." Inconsistencies. Adrian frowned, glancing at Serena. She didn't meet his gaze. Tessa clicked to a slide, showing data pulled from one of the company's new routing systems. Numbers highlighted in red. Delays that looked far worse than reality. Adrian felt a jolt. He had seen these figures before, but not in this configuration. Someone had rearranged them, selectively displaying only the worst-case projections. These variances align with decisions made during Adrian's interim management, Tessa continued. "Of course, we appreciate his efforts during this difficult period, but we need to ensure the company remains stable." It was the first public attempt to undermine him, and it landed like a punch to the gut. Adrian tried to correct her. He explained the missing context, the cherry-picked metrics, but as he spoke, he saw doubt flicker across the faces of board members. Doubt he hadn't put there. Doubt someone had been feeding them long before this meeting. And the worst part, Serena remained silent. Afterward, she claimed she hadn't wanted to defend him publicly because it would look biased. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were tense, torn between him and the family machine pulling at her. That night, standing in the quiet kitchen of their Linden Row townhouse, Adrian asked her gently, "Do you really think I'd risk the company, your father's company?" Serena hesitated, and though she eventually said no, the hesitation was enough to make the floor tilt beneath him. From that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind closed doors. His conversations he wasn't part of, decisions made without him, narratives he no longer controlled. As Gregory's health worsened, he transferred more responsibilities into that family trust. Decisions that had once required his signatures now needed only the approval of his daughters, not Adrian, not the man Gregory had once called the son he never had. Serena visited the hospital daily, her shoulders weighed down by stress and expectation. Tessa, meanwhile, split her time between supporting the company and protecting the family, language she used with increasing frequency and disturbing confidence. There were private meetings between the sisters behind Gregory's closed door. Adrian overheard fragments, not enough to form full sentences, but enough to form dread, stability, control. "He's too involved. Dad wouldn't want. You're the bloodline." The words echoed through him long after the voices were gone. Still, Adrian pushed forward. He focused on the business, trying to believe the cracks he felt were temporary, brought on by stress and fear. He tried to trust Serena the way he always had. He tried to dismiss Tessa's cold stares as overprotectiveness rather than calculated strategy. But then another shift occurred, small, subtle, but unmistakably intentional. HR head Priya Nand, someone Adrian had always trusted, began sending him detailed summaries of interpersonal concerns. Team members who supposedly felt pressured by Adrian's management style. Offhand comments documented as abrasive tone. Meetings he'd conducted efficiently reframed as tense. Adrian didn't know yet that Tessa had been meeting privately with Priya, reminding her that her job depended on loyalty to the royal family. He felt blindsided, confused, slowly suffocated by a narrative he didn't recognize as his own. And the worst part was the growing distance in his marriage. Serena was being pulled in two directions between the husband, who had built the company with her father, and the sister, who reminded her daily of her family duty. She still kissed him goodnight. She still leaned her head on his shoulder sometimes when exhaustion hollowed her out. But her mind was elsewhere. Her trust had grown fragile, thin enough that Tessa's whispers slipped through easily. Adrian didn't know it yet, but the ground was shifting beneath him. The pieces were aligning into a shape he couldn't yet see, a shape carved from ambition, fear, and a betrayal he never imagined Serena would be capable of. The fall had already begun. He just hadn't reached the edge yet. By the time winter settled over Brighton Falls, a cold tension had settled over Helio Vantage as well, one that Adrian felt long before he understood it. It began subtly, like a draft seeping through unseen cracks, a missing email, a delayed financial packet. A meeting shifted without notice. None of it felt like an attack, just disorganization, at least. That's what he told himself. But beneath the surface, an invisible hand was rearranging the pieces with meticulous intent. That hand belonged to Tessa Ward. She moved through the halls of Aurora Plaza like someone who already owned the building, her heels clicking sharply against polished floors, her expression unreadable and ruthlessly efficient. Employees began glancing over their shoulders when she passed, lowering their voices. Conversations that once flowed openly with Adrian now felt surface level, nervous, edited. It didn't happen overnight. It happened through whispers, numbers she highlighted in red, questions she phrased as concerns. Concerns she repeated until they became patterns. At first, she targeted small things, operational plans Adrian had designed, risk assessments he'd approved. She would pull Serena aside after meetings, her voice low, her hand resting on Serena's arm in a way that looked comforting but carried something sharp. "He's overwhelmed," she would say. "I'm worried about him. We all are. He's spreading himself too thin. It's not healthy. I know you love him, Serena, but love can make you blind. Someone has to protect the company." Serena would listen, tense, uncertain. Tessa knew exactly how to play her, how to wrap concern around manipulation until they were indistinguishable. Adrian noticed the shift in Serena before he fully understood its source. At home, she grew quieter, her thoughts drifting somewhere he couldn't reach. She would pause before answering his questions about work, small hesitations that stung more than the answers themselves. She began asking if he was stressed, if he felt out of sync, if he needed to consider delegating more. It was the delegation comment that stuck. He rarely delegated critical tasks because he trusted his own judgment the most, because Gregory had once told him the company needed his steady hand. The suggestion that he step back, coming from Serena, felt like a betrayal wrapped in worry. One evening, as snow dusted the sidewalks of Linden Row, Serena approached him in the kitchen, her voice gentle but cautious. "Tessa thinks you're under too much pressure," she said, refusing to meet his gaze. "She said the board is concerned about the pace of your decisions." Tessa said that. His tone was calm, but inside, something tightened. "Or is that what you think?" Serena flinched, and Adrian immediately regretted the question, the edge in his voice. But truthfully, he was afraid not of losing control, but of losing Serena to her sister's relentless influence. "I'm just trying to understand what's going on," she whispered. "You're quieter lately. Distracted. It feels like we're drifting." He wanted to pull her close, to tell her he wasn't drifting from her, but from the growing storm he sensed at Heliovantage. But he couldn't articulate what he didn't yet understand. Instead, he told her everything was fine. He reassured her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And Serena, desperate for peace, let the subject drop. Yet the distance lingered. Meanwhile, at work, Tessa escalated her quiet campaign. She began requesting access to financial documents outside her purview, citing strategic analysis. She pulled department heads into closed-door meetings. She offered unsolicited suggestions to the board that contradicted Adrian's recommendations. And then she set her sights on HR. Priya Nand, the human resources director, had always respected Adrian. They'd worked together to improve employee support programs and streamline onboarding. But now, Priya seemed conflicted. She'd stopped by his office with reports he'd never asked for, documents detailing minor interpersonal issues, vague complaints about his tone, and concerns from employees who had never voiced a single complaint to him directly. Each report ended the same way. No formal action recommended, but a notation that patterns were forming. When Adrian asked Priya where these concerns originated, she hesitated before saying they had been brought to her attention. She didn't say by whom. She didn't need to. Tessa's fingerprints were all over it. Still, Adrian didn't want to believe Serena's sister, his sister-in-law, the aunt of the children he imagined they'd raise one day, would actively work to undermine him. The idea felt too ugly, too personal, but the cracks were widening. Another shift came during leadership meetings. Topics Adrian normally led were now introduced by Serena or Tessa. His insights were sometimes dismissed as overly optimistic or operationally narrow, words Tessa used with surgical precision. Serena rarely contradicted her. One afternoon, as Adrian was preparing notes for a client review, Evelyn Stone, one of the board members he respected most, asked to speak privately. Her expression was thoughtful, but there was an undertone of concern. "I've noticed tension between you and Serena," she said carefully, "and the shift in how certain decisions are being made." Adrian tried to downplay it, insisting the company was simply adjusting during Gregory's illness. But Evelyn's next words sent a chill through him. "Sometimes ambition hides behind the language of protection. Be careful who you trust, Adrian." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him with a sinking feeling he couldn't shake. At home, the tension deepened. Serena was torn between her husband and her sister, between her loyalty to Adrian and the fear that Tessa was feeding, the fear that Adrian might take the company in directions Gregory never intended. That fear became a weapon. The breaking point came during a dinner at the Ward family home. Gregory was weak but present. Serena sat stiffly beside him, and Tessa seemed almost glowing with confidence. Over roast chicken and soft candlelight, Tessa casually mentioned that some board members were worried Adrian was pushing initiatives without proper oversight. Adrian calmly explained the decisions, but Tessa cut him off. "We're not attacking you," she said sweetly. "We're just trying to keep the company safe." Gregory, too tired to play peacemaker, simply sighed. Serena looked between them, her face tight with anxiety, and Adrian felt something inside him crack. He realized then that he was no longer fighting for influence in the company. He was fighting for truth, truth buried under layers of manipulation, fear, and blind loyalty. But he still didn't see the full picture. He didn't see that the documents Tessa used to question his decisions had been selectively edited. He didn't know that board members were being briefed privately before meetings. He didn't understand yet that Tessa wasn't just trying to protect the company. She was building a case, brick by brick, to remove him from it entirely. That night, after the tense dinner, Adrian stood outside on the Ward family's porch, watching snow swirl in the streetlights. He imagined exhaling, letting the cold take him, letting the exhaustion consume him. But he couldn't. Something instinctive, something loyal to the company, to Gregory, to Serena, kept him standing. He didn't know then that the storm was only beginning. The real betrayal hadn't arrived yet, but its shadow was already there, long, creeping, and impossible to outrun. And Tessa, with her poised smile and sharpened ambition, was already preparing her next move. The unraveling began with a single delayed shipment, a hiccup so small that on any normal day, it would have been resolved with a few calls and a corrective adjustment. But on this particular day, in this particular chapter of Helio Vantage's history, that delay would become the spark Tessa needed to ignite a carefully engineered downfall. The client in question was Northwind Retail Group, one of Helio Vantage's largest partners. They depended on precise timing, down to the hour, to keep their seasonal inventory moving. When their shipment arrived late, the complaint shot up the chain with unusual speed. Adrian didn't even know about the issue until he received an urgent meeting request with the board, one that came with almost no explanation. That alone set his nerves on edge. He arrived in the conference room to find an atmosphere thick with tension, as though everyone already knew something he didn't. Serena sat near the far end of the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes downcast. Beside her, Tessa was flipping through a printed packet, her posture confident, her expression calm, too calm. Adrian, Evelyn Stone, greeted him with a polite nod. "Thank you for coming on short notice." I only got a vague notification before anyone else could speak. Tessa Stone, "You're dealing with a significant operational failure," she announced, clicking a button to get the data processed. Northland's shipment delay costed nearly $500,000 in sales opportunities, and by blaming Helo's advantage, Adrian stepped closer, scanning the numbers. His stomach twisted not because he feared what he saw, but because he recognized immediately that something was off. "These numbers aren't accurate," said Tessa. "The delay was only a few hours. It shouldn't have triggered anything this extreme." Tessa's smile was a thin, polished blade. "We verified the data through our internal logs." Adrian felt something cold crawl up his spine. Internal logs. Logs he had designed. Logs he knew could be manipulated if someone had the skill, motive, and access. He looked toward Jonah Briggs, the IT lead, who sat stiffly at the edge of the room, eyes locked on his hands. Jonah didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't move. That alone told Adrian everything. Jonah had been pressured into silence. "Tessa," Adrian began carefully, These logs don't match the original timestamps. They've been. Are you suggesting, she cut in smoothly, that someone on the operations team tampered with data? Her voice carried just enough shock to sound believable, just enough bite to imply accusation. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung like smoke in the air. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but his voice was drowned out by the shuffling of papers as Priyanand stood up, clutching a folder like it weighed heavily on her conscience. I have something to present, Priya said. Avoiding Adrian's eyes, he felt the floor tilt beneath him. No, not Priya. She placed a report on the table, hands trembling slightly. This is a summary of recent behavioral concerns raised within the operations division. Behavioral concerns. Adrian stared at her, stunned. Priya had always been direct, always rooted in fairness. She would never fabricate a complaint, never exaggerate an issue, unless someone had cornered her. She flipped open the file. Allegations of impulsive decision-making. Claims of pressured deadlines. Notes implying emotional volatility. All vague, all impossible to verify, all perfectly timed. Priya, Adrian said quietly, you know these claims are. She shook her head, a silent apology buried in her eyes. But she couldn't say the words out loud. She wasn't allowed to. Howard Kane, the senior board member and Gregory's longtime friend, looked at Adrian with pained confusion. Son, is any of this true? Adrian's throat tightened. No, none of it. Tessa stepped forward. I think it's clear we have a pattern forming. Poor judgment, risk-taking, emotional strain combined with this costly shipment failure. The board needs to act before the company suffers further damage. Her tone was calm, reasonable, almost sympathetic, the perfect mask. Serena remained silent. That silence broke Adrian more than the accusations. He felt heat building in his chest, anger, betrayal, humiliation, but he swallowed it down. Losing his composure would only feed the narrative they were crafting. He turned to Serena, his voice steady. You know this isn't true. All of it, you know it's twisted. Serena's hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a flicker of a moment, she almost spoke, almost defended him, almost stood by the man she had once sworn to protect. But Tessa placed a hand on her arm, a small gesture, invisible to most but unmistakable in its meaning. Serena exhaled shakily and whispered, Adrian, maybe you just need some time to step back. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like a knife. The board murmured. Papers shuffled, decisions solidified. Evelyn looked conflicted but uncertain. Howard looked heartbroken. Jonah stared blankly at the table. Priya quietly wiped the corner of her eye. Then Tessa delivered the final blow. In light of these events, she said, and with Gregory unable to oversee operations due to his health, the Ward Family Trust has voted to remove Adrian Locke from his position as COO, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like a sentence being passed. Serena didn't look up. Adrian felt something deep inside him collapse. Not his career, not his reputation, but the bond he had believed unbreakable. The marriage he'd trusted more than any boardroom, more than any title, more than any company. And then security entered the room. 2 guards he knew by name, men he greeted every morning, men who now avoided his gaze, their faces guilty. Mr. Locke, one of them said quietly, we need to escort you to gather your personal items. The humiliation was surgical. He walked through the halls he'd helped build, past employees who looked at him with confusion and fear, past the glass walls, reflecting a man who no longer recognized himself, past the reception desk, where Serena once surprised him with lunch on their anniversary. He gathered his things into a cardboard box, photos, files, memories, and walked out under the fluorescent lights that suddenly felt too bright, too harsh, too revealing. Tessa didn't even pretend to be remorseful. Her triumphant smirk was the last thing he saw before the elevator doors closed. Serena didn't follow him. She didn't call out, didn't defend him. didn't even try to explain. When the doors closed, Adrian stood alone in the mirrored elevator, clutching his box of belongings as if it were the only piece of his life still intact. But amid the humiliation, something glimmered an instinct, a memory, a quiet revelation. He had backed up the internal logs, the ones before they were altered, the ones that told the real story. Inside the cardboard box, buried under the framed photo of his wedding day, was an external hard drive, small, silver, unassuming, a device that could unravel everything. And though Adrian didn't realize it yet, that tiny piece of metal would become the key to exposing lies, uncovering fraud, and dismantling the empire Tessa believed she controlled. The fall wasn't over, but neither was the fight. The days after Adrian's removal unfolded with a dull, suffocating quiet, one that felt almost heavier than the shock itself. The kind of quiet that settled into his bones and followed him everywhere. Into the corners of his new apartment, through the long nights where sleep refused to come, and into the mornings where the sun rose without warmth. He had gone from a townhouse on Linden Row, a home filled with Serena's soft laughter and the gentle hum of shared routines, to a one-bedroom rental in Harborview District. The apartment was small, stark, and smelled faintly of fresh paint and loneliness. He set the cardboard box of his belongings on the narrow kitchen counter, staring at it as though it contained the remnants of someone else's life. There were things he didn't have the strength to unpack. His wedding photo, the commemorative plaque Gregory had gifted him, the Helio Vantage employee badge he had forgotten to turn in, still clipped to the edge of a folder. At the very bottom, buried beneath papers and memories he didn't want to look at, was the silver external hard drive. The one piece of control he still had. He didn't touch it, not yet. The wound was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. Every time he reached for it, he saw Serena's face in the boardroom, pale, conflicted, but silent. Silence that had carved a fault line straight through his chest. He spent the first 2 days in a fog, moving through the apartment like a ghost. He tried to read, tried to distract himself, tried to breathe normally, but every corner reminded him of what he'd lost: his marriage, his reputation, his life's work, and in the empty space where Serena's presence used to be, anxiety crept in like an unwelcome tenant. By the third day, whispers had spread across the industry. People who had once admired him now messaged with cautious sympathy, thinly veiled curiosity, or strategic silence. He saw a news article online: restructuring at Helio Vantage, internal mismanagement alleged. They didn't name him, but the implication was unmistakable. The narrative was shifting, and not in his favor. That evening, as Adrian stared out the apartment's small balcony window, watching headlights streak across the distant Bayline Bridge, he wondered if this was what it felt like to drown slowly. Then came the knock, a soft, hesitant rhythm, like someone knocking with the hope he wouldn't answer. When he opened the door, Jonah Briggs stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes tired, clutching a worn laptop bag like a lifeline. "Can I come in?" Jonah asked quietly. Adrian stepped aside. The moment the door closed, Jonah's composure cracked. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what happened." Adrian shook his head. "None of that was your fault." Jonah swallowed hard. "But I should have said something. I should have fought harder. They threatened to fire me if I interfered." Adrian's chest tightened at the fear in Jonah's voice. This wasn't just office politics, it was coercion. "What did they do, Jonah?" he asked gently. Jonah opened his laptop, fingers trembling as he navigated through files. "You were right. The Northwind logs were altered. I didn't do it. Someone logged in through an administrative override, 2 hours before the board meeting. I tried tracing it, but access was blocked. All I know is, the changes were deliberate. Deliberate." The word hit Adrian like a punch. "They set me up," Adrian murmured. Jonah nodded, face pale. "And there's more." He handed Adrian a USB drive. "These are the system fragments I recovered before they locked me out. Someone deleted the originals, but they left behind enough metadata to prove tampering. I don't know who did it, but the access points lead to one of the executive suites. Tessa? It had to be Tessa. But something in Adrian hesitated, not out of doubt, but because betrayal rarely traveled alone. If Tessa orchestrated this, did Serena know? Did she contribute? Or had she been manipulated into silence as much as he had been pushed into ruin? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Jonah stayed only an hour, long enough to unburden himself, long enough to apologize again, and long enough to plant the seed of something dangerous hope. When Jonah left, Adrian sat on the floor beside the box of his belongings. His fingers brushed against the external hard drive. He plugged it into his laptop. The screen lit up with years of archived data, emails, financial projections, operational logs, contract drafts, internal memos, correspondence threads with Gregory. He had backed up everything as part of his meticulous habit. What once served as an organizational safety net now felt like a weapon one he hadn't meant to carry. He began scrolling through folders, scanning timestamps, cross-checking edited logs with originals. The pieces were scattered, but patterns emerged quickly. Shell company invoices, unusual consultant fees, labeled as strategic evaluations, routing data manipulated to create artificial risk metrics, documents approved without Gregory's signature, despite appearing stamped with his name, and at the center of it all, a signature. Ward's Strategic Partners, a consulting firm he had never heard of. He dug deeper. The firm was registered under a holding company. The holding company was managed by a private trustee. The trustee was linked to an address he recognized, Tessa's. Adrian sat back, pulse thundering in his ears. The betrayal broadened into something more sinister than he'd imagined. This wasn't just ambition. This wasn't just a family choosing blood over marriage. This was corporate fraud, and he now held the evidence. For a moment, he closed his eyes and exhaled shakily. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion, grief, and a looming sense of responsibility he could neither ignore nor escape. If he exposed this, Serena would be dragged into the fallout. Even if she wasn't involved, she would bear the shame. Gregory, frail, vulnerable, would watch his daughters become headlines. Employees could panic. Investors might pull out. The company he'd given everything to could crumble. But if he stayed quiet, he would live with the knowledge that the people who betrayed him would continue. Climbing atop the ruins they created, he rubbed a hand over his face. Gregory trusted me. People trusted me. And then, for the first time in days, his posture straightened. He wouldn't act impulsively. He wouldn't burst into heliovantage, seeking confrontation or revenge. He would be meticulous, strategic, controlled. He would gather everything, every file, every discrepancy, every piece of proof. He would understand the full scope before taking a single step, because now he knew what this was. Not a fall from grace, a cover-up, a power grab, a betrayal orchestrated with precision. And Adrian Locke, broken, humiliated, stripped of everything, still had one thing left: the truth, and the unwavering resolve to uncover it. The quiet drowning had ended. The resurfacing had begun. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the water like scattered shards of hope. Inside, Adrian leaned toward the glow of his laptop, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the next morning, the exhaustion had settled into Adrian's muscles, like wet sand, heavy, unavoidable, but his mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. Clarity came not from rest, but from purpose. The truth was no longer something he'd stumbled into accidentally. It was something he had to chase now, with intention, with precision, because once betrayal revealed itself, you either ran from it or you ran toward it. Adrian had never been the running type. He brewed coffee in the small Harborview kitchenette and sat down at his makeshift desk, a folding table pressed against the window. The silver hard drive rested beside his laptop like a silent ally. As the sun began its slow climb over Brighton Falls, casting pale orange light across the apartment, Adrian opened the first folder. For the next 3 hours, he sifted through years of data operations logs, board memos, vendor contracts, internal investigations, and financial statements that felt too polished, too curated. He moved with a calm, methodical rhythm, resisting the urge to jump to conclusions. He needed a timeline. He needed proof. He needed enough clarity to battle not just Tessa's schemes, but the credibility of the entire board if it came to that. By late morning, a disturbing pattern emerged. It began 6 months earlier, around the time Marcus Ellery, the CFO, had abruptly resigned. The official story had been personal reasons. At the time, Adrian hadn't questioned it. Marcus was private, introverted, the kind of man who kept his head down and did his job with quiet integrity. But now, scrolling through archived emails, Adrian saw signs he'd missed back then. Marcus hesitating on projections, pushing back on consultant payouts, asking subtle questions about financial discrepancies, and then, suddenly, gone. The timing was no coincidence. Adrian leaned back, rubbing his eyes. If Marcus had been pushed out, then someone had replaced him. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who approved what they were told to approve. That alone didn't prove anything, but combined with the doctored routing logs, the consultant invoices, and the ward's strategic partners connection, it painted a dangerous picture. He opened another folder, personal copies of emails Gregory had sent him. Among them, he found one dated 8 months ago. Tessa wants more say in company decisions. I'm not sure she's ready or responsible, but she pushes hard. You're steady, Adrian. Keep your eyes open. Gregory. Adrian stared at the message for a long moment, grief and guilt winding through him. Gregory had sensed something too. He just hadn't lived long enough, strong enough to stop it. The next folder revealed payments to Ward's strategic partners, disguised as research trips and consulting fees. The amounts were small enough to evade suspicion individually, but added up to a significant siphoning of funds over time. Adrian cross-referenced the dates with internal meeting notes. Each payment aligned with key decisions the board had been influenced to reconsider. He whispered into the empty apartment. You were buying votes. Not outright bribery, more like manipulation through data shaping and expert advice, conveniently crafted by the same hands, benefiting from the outcome. To confirm his growing suspicion, Adrian needed someone from inside, someone who had glimpsed the truth before being forced out. Marcus. He hadn't spoken to the former CFO. Since his sudden resignation, Marcus had left quietly, avoiding calls and disappearing into the background of corporate gossip. But if anyone had answers, it would be him. Adrian found Marcus's contact listed under an old number that miraculously still worked. The call rang twice before a weary voice answered. Adrian. The recognition was instant, heavy. I need to see you, Adrian said. It's about Heliovantage. And what happened before you left? There was a long silence. Meet me at the old train station on Pierce Avenue, Marcus said finally. Back platform. Come alone. The Pierce Avenue station had been abandoned years ago, replaced by a newer transit hub closer to downtown. Now, it stood as a relic, its brick walls cracked, the paint peeling, graffiti climbing the pillars like wild vines. Wind whistled through broken window panes, carrying the faint smell of rust and dust. Marcus arrived late, shoulders hunched inside a heavy coat, eyes darting with wariness. He looked like a man carrying secrets that had aged him faster than time. You're in trouble, Marcus said by way of greeting. And not the kind that disappears. Adrian exhaled. Then help me understand. What? Marcus looked away, jaw tightening. They pushed me out, not with threats yet, but with pressure. Tessa wasn't interested in accuracy. She wanted justification, numbers that supported her pitch to outside parties. What parties? Marcus hesitated. Victor Lang. The name meant nothing to Adrian. Private investor. Marcus continued. Old money? Ruthless? He's been circling Heliovantage for years. Tessa met with him privately, more than once. I found out by accident. A cold weight settled in Adrian's stomach. Marcus pulled a flash drive from his coat. I kept copies. Not everything, but enough. Adrian took it with a quiet nod of gratitude. Marcus continued, voice low. Victor wanted control. Tessa offered him an entry point. She needed to weaken existing leadership, especially you. She needed the board doubting you. Serena was useful. Adrian's chest ached. Was she involved? Marcus met his eyes. I don't think she knew the whole plan, but fear makes vulnerable people easy to sway. Tessa fed her just enough truth to distort everything else. She loves her father, and Tessa told her that you were trying to push Gregory aside. The lie hit Adrian like a physical blow. Marcus sighed. The more Serena worried, the more Tessa pushed. The more Tessa pushed, the easier it was for Victor to move behind the scenes. Adrian clenched his fists, and the crisis. The Northwind shipment, engineered, Marcus said. Not entirely fabricated. The delay was real. But the scale, the data, the consequences, all exaggerated. I suspect Victor's team helped. He has resources, and they used it to fire me. Marcus nodded. You were the last obstacle. With you gone, Serena could be steered. Tessa could rise. Victor could buy the company for a fraction of its worth. The puzzle pieces snapped together like a trap. Adrian felt something ignite in his chest. Anger, yes, but also something sharper. Resolve. Marcus, he said quietly. I'm going to expose this. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. Then he nodded. I thought you would. He placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity or apology or both. Be careful, Marcus said. They've invested too much to let you ruin the plan. And Victor is not someone you want as an enemy. That night, back in his dim apartment, overlooking the faint lights of Harborview, Adrian connected the flash drive Marcus had given him. The files were damning email exchanges, proposal drafts, financial anomalies, and references to a post-transitional restructuring that all but confirmed the coming sale. A betrayal woven through data trails, a betrayal engineered by Tessa, a betrayal Serena might have unknowingly helped empower. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped in front of his mouth. He stared at the screen long after the last file closed. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. This was about saving the company Gregory trusted him to protect, saving the employees whose pensions were tied to Heliovantage stock, saving the legacy that Serena, in her fear, was about to lose to people who would gut it without hesitation, and, above all, stopping the two people who had orchestrated the destruction of his life. For the first time since he was escorted out of Aurora Plaza, Adrian felt steady. He had the truth. He had allies. He had purpose. Now he just needed a way to bring it all to light, and he knew exactly where to start next. Adrian barely slept that night. Even when he lay down, closing his burning eyes, the information he'd uncovered looped relentlessly through his mind. The hard drive, the doctored logs, Marcus's confession, Victor Lang's shadow creeping into places Adrian never thought corruption could reach. Every fragment sharpened the truth. Heliovantage, Gregory's life's work, Serena's inheritance. Adrian's purpose was being quietly carved apart by hands, pretending to protect it. By dawn, he was sitting at the folding table again. The glow of his laptop, casting long shadows across the cramped apartment. He didn't feel defeated anymore. He felt dangerous, armed, not with revenge, but with evidence. Cold, undeniable facts. Yet he knew evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed clarity. He needed perspective. He needed someone who could confirm the pieces he hadn't yet understood. Someone who had been close enough to see the signs, but far enough from Tessa's influence to speak freely. There was only one person who fit. Marcus had given him the financial thread, but the operational shifts, the leadership dynamics, the company's internal pressure points. For that, he needed a clearer lens. He needed answers from someone who'd been shoved out before him. He needed to find Marcus again, but this time, not just for files. He needed the whole story. But before he reached for his phone, a different name rose in his mind. Uninvited, yet undeniable. Serena. He ignored it, pushed it down. He wasn't ready to confront the part she had played. Not yet. Not while he didn't know where her ignorance ended and her complicity began. Instead, he scrolled through old messages, looking for someone else he hadn't contacted since the fallout. Jordan Hale, the former logistics analyst who had resigned abruptly 2 months earlier. A quiet man, brilliant with numbers, fiercely loyal to Gregory, and someone who had always appeared uncomfortable around Tessa. Adrian found his number and sent a message. "Jordan, it's Adrian. I need to talk. It's urgent. About the company." Jordan replied within minutes. "You finally see it. Meet me at Blue Lantern Bistro, noon." Blue Lantern Bistro sat tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop on a quiet Brighton Falls street. A small bell chimed when Adrian pushed the door open. The warm smell of roasted coffee hit him instantly, a stark contrast to the icy dread he carried. Jordan was already there, hunched over a mug, eyes darting between the entrance and the window. The moment he saw Adrian, he motioned him over quickly, as though the walls themselves could be listening. "You look terrible," Jordan said softly. "So do you," Adrian replied. That earned a bitter smile. They spoke in low voices, careful, almost conspiratorial. Jordan didn't waste time. "Marcus wasn't the only one Tessa pushed out," he said, fingers tightening around his mug. "I started seeing discrepancies in shipment documentation patterns that made no sense. When I tried to bring it up to her, she shut me out. When I brought it to Serena, Tessa found out within an hour. After that, my access changed, my responsibilities shifted, and eventually, I was encouraged to seek other opportunities." Adrian felt anger rise, cold and familiar. "Why didn't you come to me?" Jordan's eyes dimmed. "You were disappearing into meetings, getting incomplete data, getting cut out. I didn't know if you were part of it or the next target." Adrian swallowed hard. Jordan continued, voice quieter. "Tessa told the board you were making reckless expansion decisions. She used half data, cherry-picked risk metrics. She sold the narrative that you were becoming unstable. Serena didn't defend you because she was scared of losing the company, scared of choosing sides." Adrian closed his eyes briefly, and that fear made her choose Tessa. Jordan nodded. "Tessa's always known how to weaponize loyalty." The words settled like frost. Then Jordan leaned forward. "But that's not the worst part." Adrian braced himself. Jordan slid a thin manila envelope across the table. Inside were photos grainy, taken from a distance. Serena in a sleek charcoal blazer, stepping out of a black car, entering Skyline Tower, leaving 3 hours later, face pale. "Where did these come from?" Adrian whispered. "I took them," Jordan said. "I followed her after I noticed she was signing off on documents without your knowledge. She wasn't meeting clients. She was meeting Victor Lang." Adrian's grip tightened around the photos. Serena hadn't just been manipulated. She'd been involved even if she didn't know the full truth. The ground beneath him shifted, Jordan continued. "I don't think she understood what she was stepping into. Tessa framed those meetings as financial rescue missions, emergency cash infusions. Serena thought she was saving the company. By going behind my back," Adrian said, hollow. Jordan's expression softened. "She trusted her sister. Not you." Those 5 words cut deeper than any betrayal from Tessa ever could. Adrian exhaled slowly. "This is bigger than me. Bigger than any marriage drama. They're trying to sell the company." Jordan nodded. "And they almost succeeded. The only obstacle was you. That's why they built a case to remove you. With you gone, they could convince the board that the sale was necessary." Adrian rubbed his temples. "And Gregory never approved it," Jordan said. But after his health declined, the family trust gave Serena and Tessa equal voting rights. They could outvote everyone, including him. The pieces clicked together in Adrian's mind, like a lock snapping shut. He had enough evidence to expose Tessa's fraud, enough to implicate Victor, enough to show Serena's involvement, whether naive or intentional, enough to dismantle everything they'd built against him. But evidence wasn't enough. He needed a witness. He needed credibility. He needed someone the board would trust. He needed Marcus. He needed Jordan. He needed someone who hadn't yet chosen a side, and someone else lingered in the back of his thoughts, Evelyn Stone. If he could get Evelyn on his side, if he could present everything in one precise, undeniable sweep, he could blow apart Tessa's scheme before Victor got his claws into the company. But he couldn't do it alone, Jordan, Adrian said, voice steady. Will you stand with me? Jordan hesitated, fear flickering, but then nodded. I will. After leaving the bistro, Adrian walked with careful purpose through the gray Brighton Falls afternoon. His breath formed faint clouds in the chilly air. His pace quickened as pieces of the plan formed in his mind. He needed to verify the shell companies, confirm the forged signatures, cross-reference the financial siphoning. He needed to prepare for pushback, and he needed to be ready for the moment Serena would inevitably confront him, because she would, because he knew her, because betrayal wasn't clean. It left threads, loose and tangled. He returned to his apartment and spent hours building timelines, labeling documents, connecting dots on digital boards. His laptop became a battlefield, each folder, each email, a weapon sharpened for war. And then, around midnight, exhausted but resolved, Adrian stared at the evidence, piling on the screen, and knew two things with overwhelming certainty. Tessa had orchestrated the downfall, but Serena's silence had empowered it. The truth would hurt her, but lies would destroy everything. He had no choice now. Tomorrow, he would take the next step, one that would reshape everything, confront Serena. Not to accuse her, but to uncover just how deep the betrayal truly ran. Adrian rehearsed the conversation in his mind a dozen times before the moment actually came. Each version felt wrong, too angry, too timid, too broken, too cold. How did someone confront the person they had once believed would never hurt them? How did he separate Serena, the woman who fell asleep on his chest every Sunday morning, who cried when they planted their first tree in the backyard, who whispered, "You're my safe place," on their wedding night, from the Serena who sat in a boardroom, and watched him be dismantled piece by piece without saying a word? He didn't have an answer, but he needed one. That was why, the following afternoon, Adrian found himself standing outside Blue Lantern Bistro again, only this time as a man preparing for a different kind of battle. He had messaged Serena earlier, asking her to meet him there. She responded with, "Okay, but I don't have much time." A reply that told him everything and nothing at once. He entered the cafe slowly, scanning the dim interior, until he saw her sitting near the back, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea, hair pulled into a neat low twist. She looked tired, more tired than he remembered, and when she lifted her head to see him, something flickered in her expression. Guilt, relief, fear, all tangled. "Adrian," she said softly, as though speaking his name hurt. "Serena." The distance between them felt larger than the small wooden table separating their seats. He sat. She avoided his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Serena broke the silence, her voice trembling even as she tried to sound composed. "I heard you've been investigating things, talking to people, Jonah, Marcus." She swallowed. "You're scaring Tessa." "I'm not here because of Tessa," Adrian said. "I'm here because of you." Serena flinched. He leaned forward, keeping his voice steady. "Serena, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Not the version Tessa fed you. Not the version written for the board. Your truth." She stared down at her tea. the steam rising like something fleeting. "You think I wanted any of this?" she whispered. Adrian didn't respond. He wanted to hear her say it without prompting. Serena took a shaky breath. After Dad collapsed, everything felt like it was falling apart. The company, our family. You were working more hours than ever. You barely slept. And Tessa kept telling me you were hiding things from me. From us. Adrian's jaw tightened. And you believed her. "You weren't talking to me," she snapped suddenly, eyes brimming. "Every time I asked if you were okay, you brushed it off. You pushed yourself harder. You made decisions without checking with me, even though it's still my family's company." "That company was supposed to be ours," Adrian said quietly. "Yours, mine, and your father's, not Tessa's. Serena's shoulders sagged as though the weight she carried pressed her down. "You don't understand. Tessa convinced me that Dad's legacy was slipping away. She said the board was losing faith in you. She said investors were nervous. And then Victor came in, offering support, temporary funding, strategic advice. Victor Lang was never offering support," Adrian said sharply. "He was buying influence." Serena's eyes flickered. "I didn't know that." "Did you meet him?" Adrian pressed softly. "At Skyline Tower." Her breath hitched. He didn't push. Her silence was enough. "After a moment," she whispered, "Tessa told me it was a confidential meeting, that it had to be off book so the board wouldn't panic. I thought I was helping. I thought." Her voice broke. "I thought you were already planning to take over, to cut us out." Adrian stared at her, stunned by how deeply Tessa's narrative had infiltrated her. "You think I'd take anything from you?" he asked, voice rough. Serena shook her head fast, as if ashamed. "I don't know what to think anymore." He let out a long exhale. "Serena, I found proof. The logs were altered. The crisis was engineered. Ward Strategic Partners is Tessa's shell company. Victor's been funding her through it. This wasn't about protecting your father's legacy. It was about seizing it." Serena's breath caught in her throat. He continued, quieter now, because part of him still hated breaking her heart. "And the plan only worked if I was removed." Tears collected at the corners of her eyes. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Adrian, I swear, I didn't know everything. I ignored things. I let her whisper in my ear. I trusted her. I was scared. I thought if I didn't act fast, I'd lose my father's company. I didn't realize who I was sacrificing to keep it." There it was. The confession he'd both needed and feared. Adrian felt his chest twist. He'd imagined this moment 100 different ways. None of them prepared him for the pain on her face. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Serena wiped her cheeks, voice trembling. "I didn't defend you because I thought, maybe this was you changing. Maybe stress had gotten to you. Maybe I didn't know who you were anymore." Adrian's heart cracked. "Then you should have asked me." "You weren't listening," she cried. "You were drowning in responsibilities. You shut me out." "Because everything was falling apart," he said. "And I didn't want you to worry." They stared at each other too far apart, too close to look away. Serena whispered, "I didn't want to betray you." "But you did." The words landed heavily. She bowed her head, tears slipping down her hands. "I'm so sorry." Adrian reached out but stopped short, hand hovering. He wasn't sure if touching her would comfort him or destroy what little remained. He pulled back slowly. "Serena, I don't know if your apology fixes anything yet. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I needed to know the truth. And now I do." She nodded, sobbing quietly. After a long pause, she whispered, "What happens now?" Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the decision was clear. "I'm going to the board. Evelyn deserves to know. They all do." Serena's gaze snapped up, fear overtaking grief. "Adrian, if you go public, Tessa will explode. She'll drag me into it. She'll drag Dad into it." "She already dragged you in," he said gently. "All I'm doing is pulling you back out." "I don't know if the board will trust me anymore," she whispered. They don't need to trust you, Adrian said. They need to trust the evidence. Serena looked defeated. He stood. She rose instinctively, as if pulled by something older than their pain. I want to help, she whispered. I want to fix what I broke. You can, Adrian said, but I need you to decide something first. She swallowed hard. What? He met her eyes. A man still wounded, but standing straighter than he had in weeks. Are you going to protect the truth? Or protect Tessa? The question lingered between them. Heavier than betrayal itself? Serena shuddered. The answer hadn't formed yet, but it would. And when it did, everything would change. Adrian turned and walked out of Blue Lantern Bistro into the cold afternoon air. For the first time in a long time, the wind didn't make him shiver, it steadied him. He had confronted the woman who broke him. He had uncovered the truth he needed. Now he had to bring it to light, no matter the cost. In the days following his conversation with Serena, the atmosphere around Helio Vantage shifted in a way Adrian could almost feel through the walls of his Harborview apartment. Rumors drifted through industry channels, whispers swirled through old colleagues, and a subtle but unmistakable tension hung over the company like an advancing storm. Even from a distance, Adrian sensed movement, rearranged schedules, tightened communications, and strategic leaks that seemed too coordinated to be coincidence. Tessa was tightening her grip, and she was doing it with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. News trickled from different sources. Jonah, terrified but loyal. Jordan, cautious but firm. And even a few employees brave enough to message Adrian anonymously. Operations staff were being reassigned. Long-standing managers, especially those who had worked closely with Adrian, were quietly stripped of influence. Priya Nand was said to be preparing new NDAs with clauses aggressive enough to muzzle entire departments. The company was rearranging itself to erase him, to erase the truth, to prepare for the sale. And Serena, caught between remorse and fear, was beginning to crumble beneath her sisters. Pressure. From a distance, Adrian watched it all, with a strange combination of sorrow and determination. The betrayal still stung, sharp and raw, but something had shifted inside him after confronting Serena. For the first time since the boardroom ambush, he no longer felt like a man sinking. He felt like a man resurfacing. But resurfacing was not enough. He had evidence. But evidence required precision and allies. It required timing. It required a moment where Tessa could not twist the narrative into something she could control. That moment began forming the day Jordan sent him a message. Tessa is pushing an emergency presentation for an acquisition opportunity. Evelyn looked suspicious. Evelyn Stone, the person Adrian needed the most. The woman with integrity, strong enough to cut through data manipulation, political pressure, and board theatrics. She wasn't someone who scared easily. She wasn't someone who could be bribed or cornered. If Evelyn sensed something was wrong, she would investigate it thoroughly. But she needed a spark, a reason to dig deeper. Adrian decided to give her one. The day after Jordan's message, Adrian texted Evelyn directly, asking if she would meet him discreetly. She agreed, but the response came with a warning. "If this is about retaliation, I can't help you," he replied. "It's about saving the company and Gregory's legacy." That line earned him a meeting. It took place in Evelyn's home office on Cedar Ridge Lane, a quiet neighborhood with large porches and old trees that whispered in the wind. When Adrian stepped inside, she gestured him toward a chair opposite her neatly arranged desk. Evelyn Stone was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and sharp-witted, with a presence that commanded respect without ever raising her voice. She folded her hands and waited. "Adrian," she said softly, "I need you to be very careful with what you're about to say. This company is in a fragile position. One wrong step could break it." He nodded. "That's why I'm here, to prevent that break." And then he began. He laid out everything: Tessa's shell company, the doctored logs, the falsified crisis narrative, the pressure on HR, the siphoned consulting fees, the hidden meetings with Victor Lang. He showed her the original timestamps, the altered data, the financial trails Marcus and Jordan had confirmed. He didn't dramatize. He didn't embellish. He simply presented the truth, cold and unvarnished. By the time he finished, Evelyn was pale. She stared at the documents for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. "This," she whispered. "If this is real, it's catastrophic." "It is real," Adrian said. "Every part of it." Evelyn leaned back slowly. "Do you know what you're accusing them of?" "Yes," Adrian replied, "and I know what it cost me to say nothing before. I won't make that mistake again." She pressed her lips together, thinking, Tessa is not stupid. Evelyn finally said, "She's ambitious and reckless, but not careless. If she coordinated this, then she has people covering her tracks." "She missed things," Adrian said. "Or she thought no one would ever look." Evelyn exhaled heavily. "Victor Lang. I should have known. He always circles companies in transition." Serena must have been terrified. Adrian nodded once. "I don't think she knew everything, but she didn't stop it either." That's because she was protecting Gregory," Evelyn said, "or trying to." "And now," Adrian replied, "she needs protection from her own sister." Silence settled over the room before Evelyn spoke again. "There's a board meeting coming up," she said. "Tessa plans to introduce the acquisition proposal as a strategic pivot. Victor will be there, if what you're saying is true. She's going to frame it as the only viable path forward. She's planning the final move," Adrian said. Evelyn nodded grimly. "Which means it's time we plan ours." She tapped the file in front of her. "I want full access to everything you and your allies have gathered. Marcus, Jordan, Jonah, anyone who can corroborate. I'll quietly verify all of it before the meeting. And then?" Adrian asked. Evelyn looked up, her steel returning. "And then," she said, "we confront them in the only place where lies can't reshape themselves before the full board." Adrian felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since the day he was fired, the faint flicker of justice. But justice had its own timeline. While Evelyn worked in the background reviewing evidence, contacting Marcus privately, verifying financial trails, Heliovantage continued spiraling inward under Tessa's tightening hold. Employees were moved like pawns. Communications were monitored. The internal culture shifted from cautious to fearful, and Serena, torn and unraveling, became more isolated by the day. One night, Serena showed up at Adrian's apartment. Her eyes were red. Her hair was disheveled. She looked like a woman who had not just made mistakes, but who had finally begun to see them. When Adrian opened the door, she whispered, I don't know where else to go." He didn't step aside immediately. Something inside him still hesitated, still bled. But he wasn't cruel, and Serena wasn't the enemy. So he let her in. She stood in the small living room, arms wrapped around herself. "Tessa knows you're digging," she said softly. "She's furious. She thinks you're trying to ruin us." "She ruined herself," Adrian replied. Serena looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw devastation swimming just beneath the surface. "She won't stop," Serena whispered. "She's pushing the sail harder. Victor's pressuring her. I'm trying to slow things down, but she's not listening to me anymore. You're not useful to her anymore," Adrian said gently. "You're a liability now that you've hesitated." Serena closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She said if I don't stand with her at the meeting, she'll destroy me. Adrian's jaw clenched. She already did. Serena's breath trembled. "What do I do?" she whispered. Adrian didn't step closer. He didn't hold her. He didn't comfort her the way he once would have. But his voice, when he spoke, was softer than he intended. "You tell the truth," he said. "You help fix the damage. You stand up for your father, for the employees, for the company, and maybe someday, for us." Serena cried silently, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to break him a little. After a long moment, she nodded. "I'll help." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning, a fragile, trembling beginning. The next morning, Adrian received a message from Evelyn. The evidence is verified. The board meeting will reveal everything. Be there. He stared at the words for a long moment, the weight of them sinking in. Tessa had prepared her war, but so had he. The next chapter wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be an exposure, a reckoning, a return. Adrian powered off his laptop, straightened his shoulders, and prepared for the moment he had been walking toward since the day the boardroom doors closed behind him. This time, he would walk back in, not as a victim, but as the truth. The morning of the board meeting dawned with a brittle stillness, one that felt almost unnatural for a city as busy as Brighton Falls. Adrian woke early, not because he was rested, but because he couldn't sleep. His body had reached that point where exhaustion looped into clarity, where fear sharpened into purpose. Today wasn't merely a confrontation. It wasn't vengeance. It was the moment where truth would finally step into the same room as the lies that had devoured his life. He dressed quietly, choosing a simple black suit. It felt symbolic, an armor stripped of its old corporate shine. His reflection in the mirror looked older, harder, but steadier. He wasn't the man they'd escorted out in humiliation. Not anymore. Just before leaving, he grabbed the folder Evelyn asked him to bring. The original logs, correspondence with Gregory, Marcus's evidence, Jonah's metadata, Jordan's testimonies. Everything was organized, labeled, chronological. No emotion, no narrative, just truth. Truth was a powerful weapon if wielded right. He stepped outside, the air crisp with early winter. As he drove toward Aurora Plaza, his hands were steady on the wheel. His heart, however, pulsed with a mix of anticipation and something else he couldn't name. When he entered the building through the main doors, the familiar marble floors gleamed beneath his shoes. Employees stared first with shock, then confusion, then a flickering recognition that quickly morphed into hope or fear. It was hard to tell the difference. Whispers followed him like shadows. He rode the elevator to the Horizon conference room on the 22nd floor. The doors opened to reveal a space already humming with tension. The board had gathered. Evelyn Stone sat at the far end, posture straight, expression unreadable. She made eye contact with Adrian, giving a small, nearly imperceptible nod, a signal that everything was in motion. Howard Kane was beside her, jaw set firmly, his eyes tired but resolute. Several board members looked wary, shifting in their seats. Then there was Serena. She sat 2 chairs away from her sister, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes met Adrian's for a moment, fragile, pleading, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. And then there was Tessa, standing at the front of the room, flipping confidently through a set of glossy presentation slides, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit that matched her ruthlessness. When she saw Adrian walking in, her hand froze mid-gesture, her eyes sharpened into knives. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, voice slicing through the room. Her words echoed, but Evelyn rose before Tessa could continue. "I invited him," Evelyn said firmly. "As a consultant," Tessa repeated, incredulous. "He was fired. He is no longer part of this company." "He is part of the history of this company," Evelyn replied coolly, "and he has information relevant to the acquisition proposal you're presenting today." Tessa's lips tightened. "This is inappropriate. It's necessary," Evelyn said. Victor Lang sat at the opposite side of the table, calm, polished, predatory. His gaze flicked toward Adrian with mild curiosity, as though assessing a new piece in a game he thought he had already mastered. Adrian took his seat. Placing his folder neatly in front of him, Evelyn gestured toward Tessa. "You may proceed." Tessa inhaled sharply and launched into her presentation. Though her voice carried a hint of anger, now an edge she couldn't fully hide, she outlined the proposed acquisition, Victor's investment, the projected profits, the supposed instability in current operations, and the strategic benefits of transitioning leadership to safeguard the company's future. All the while, Victor nodded approvingly. When she finished, the room fell silent. Evelyn folded her hands. Thank you, Tessa. Now, before we open the floor for discussion, I've invited Mr. Locke to present an alternative perspective. Tessa stiffened. Absolutely not. This is absurd. It is the board's decision, Evelyn said, and the board has not yet heard all relevant information. Tessa's jaw clenched. She looked at Serena, expecting support. Serena looked down instead. Adrian rose. He didn't rush. He didn't glare. He didn't speak with anger or desperation. He spoke with clarity. I'm not here to reclaim my job, he began, and I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because this acquisition, this plan you've been presented, is built on fraud. The word detonated in the room. Murmurs erupted. Victor turned slowly, his expression cooling. Tessa went rigid, her face blanching, then flushing red. That is a dangerous accusation, Victor said calmly. Do you have proof? Yes, Adrian said simply. All of it. He began presenting the evidence. Not the emotional story, not his experience. The facts. He showed the doctored shipment logs, the real logs versus the altered ones. He explained how access overrides were used before the crisis meeting. He displayed invoices from Ward's strategic partners and revealed Tessa's ownership through shell filings. He outlined the financial inconsistencies Marcus uncovered. He played the call Marcus had recorded, where Victor hinted about eliminating emotional liabilities. He showed Jordan's photos of Serena meeting Victor off-record. He demonstrated the manipulated risk projections used to justify Adrian's removal. Every piece fit together with devastating clarity. The room went silent, not an ordinary silence, but heavy, suffocating, explosive. Howard Kane looked ill. Evelyn's expression hardened like stone. Serena's face crumpled. Tears gathering, but she didn't wipe them. Victor's jaw pulsed once. Tessa looked, cornered, finally cornered. This is fabricated, Tessa spat. He's lying. He's bitter. He wants revenge. Enough, Evelyn said sharply. No, you don't understand, Tessa tried again. But this time, it wasn't Evelyn who cut her off. It was Serena. Tessa, she whispered. Voice trembling but strong enough to stop the room. Stop. Tessa froze. Serena slowly rose from her chair. She looked at Adrian, then at the board. He's telling the truth, she said quietly. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to feel something was wrong. I should have listened. I should have questioned. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. Tessa's expression shattered into disbelief. You're choosing him, she hissed. After everything, after what we planned. Serena flinched. We didn't plan this. You did. Tessa let out a bitter laugh, stepping away, as though the room were poisoned. You're weak. You always were. Dad trusted the wrong people. And you, she pointed at Adrian. Venom dripping from every syllable, are nothing without this company. I was nothing to this company the moment you decided my integrity was a threat. Adrian replied. Evelyn stood. We've heard enough. Victor straightened, but even he could see the tide had turned. I'll need to speak with my legal team. There will be no acquisition, Evelyn said flatly. Victor's smile vanished. He rose without another word and exited the room, his footsteps echoing like a retreat. Tessa looked around wildly, realizing she had no allies left. You can't do this, she snapped. I'll sue. Howard Kane finally spoke, voice grim. Tessa, by the authority of the board, and in light of overwhelming evidence, you are suspended pending a full investigation, effective immediately. Security entered quietly behind her. It was poetic, Adrian thought. The same humiliation she arranged for him now reflected back. As they approached her, Tessa's gaze locked on Adrian with pure, unfiltered hatred. This isn't over, she whispered, but it was, and everyone in the room knew it. As she was escorted out, Serena sank back into her chair, trembling. Silence fell again. Then Evelyn turned to Adrian, her expression softening. Adrian, she said, on behalf of this board, thank you. You may have just saved this company. He nodded, though the victory felt strangely hollow, because saving the company was one thing. Saving what was left of his marriage, if anything remained, was another battle entirely, and he wasn't sure he had the strength for it. Not yet. After the board meeting detonated like a controlled explosion, precise, devastating, irreversible heliovantage was left standing in a stunned, quiet, the kind that settles after a storm no one saw coming until it was directly overhead, and though Adrian had been the one to deliver the final blow to Tessa's scheme, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt hollow, exhausted, uncertain of what came next. Word spread fast throughout the company. Employees whispered in break rooms about Tessa being escorted out, about Victor Lang storming out of headquarters, about Adrian returning like a ghost who'd refused to stay dead. Yet whispers carried something else. To relief. For months they'd been walking on eggshells, sensing something dangerous beneath the surface but unable to name it. Now, the truth had a name. But while the company exhaled, Adrian felt tension coil tighter inside him. The next 48 hours were a blur of internal investigations, emergency meetings, legal consultations, and frantic efforts to stabilize operations. Evelyn led the process with razor-sharp focus, guiding the board through each necessary step to ensure heliovantage didn't fall into freefall now. That its power structure had been violently reshuffled. Evelyn called Adrian more times in those 2 days than she had in the previous 3 years combined. I need clarification on the financial discrepancies, she said in one call. We'll need your help explaining the operational timeline, she said in another. Marcus is willing to testify formally. Jordan too. I'll need you to review their statements. Gregory's doctors even reached out, having heard about the internal disruption. They requested updates on the company to share with him carefully. Given his fragile condition, it was chaos, controlled, but still chaos. Serena, meanwhile, seemed to vanish inside the building, present in meetings, completing tasks with precision, but emotionally distant. She no longer stood beside Tessa's shadow, but she didn't stand beside Adrian either. She existed somewhere in between, like a person suspended between guilt and responsibility, unsure which direction would let her breathe. Adrian avoided her too, not out of spite but out of necessity. They needed distant space to process the devastation between them. Still, reminders of their history were everywhere. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Adrian found himself alone in his temporary office on the 15th floor, a bare space Evelyn had offered him to coordinate the evidence transfer. The room was quiet except for the hum of city lights outside, casting shifting reflections across glass walls. He was reviewing Marcus's financial breakdown when a soft knock interrupted him. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Serena stepped in, hesitant, as if afraid the floor might collapse beneath her feet. Is this a bad time? She asked quietly. It's fine, he said, though the papers in front of him blurred slightly. She moved closer, stopping halfway between the door and his desk. I heard the board asked you to continue helping with the audit. He nodded. They want everything airtight before announcing anything publicly. That's good, she whispered, though the words landed weakly. Silence drifted between them, heavy and awkward. Finally, Serena said, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not destroying me with everyone else. Her voice trembled. Fragile, but earnest. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't begging. She was acknowledging something he had done instinctively. Without thinking, he had protected her during the board meeting. Not once had he mentioned her involvement, her silence, her meetings with Victor. He had kept her name out of the darkest parts of the truth. You didn't deserve to be destroyed, he said quietly. You were misled. Serena's breath caught. But I didn't stop it, she whispered. I didn't defend you. I let fear make me cruel. Adrian closed the file. You were scared. Tessa made sure of it. Victor made sure of it. Serena stepped closer, tears gathering in her eyes. No, I made sure of it. I listened to the wrong person. I chose the wrong person. And I lost everything. Her voice cracked on the last word. Adrian's heart twisted, but he stayed seated, hands clasped tightly. You haven't lost everything, haven't I? She asked. My marriage is broken. My father is disappointed in me. My sister might go to prison. And I betrayed the one person who ever truly believed in me. He looked up then, meeting her eyes. And you still get to decide what kind of person you'll be now. Serena's resolve crumbled. A tear slid down her cheek. I want to make it right, she said. I don't know how yet, but I want to. Adrian exhaled. That's a start. She nodded slowly, lingering for a moment as if wanting to say more. Then she turned and left. Adrian watched the door close behind her, unsure if what he felt was relief or grief. Maybe both. The following morning, Evelyn called an early meeting with Adrian, Marcus, Jordan, and a few key legal consultants. They gathered in a smaller conference room, not nearly as intimidating as the Horizon room, but still suffocating in its seriousness. Evelyn opened the meeting briskly. We've confirmed that Ward's strategic partners funneled payments through 3 shell corporations before directing funds toward Victor's acquisition attempt. Adrian nodded. That matches the records Marcus provided. We also confirmed, Evelyn continued, that Tessa used falsified data to manipulate performance metrics and create the appearance of instability. This justifies full removal and criminal investigation. Jordan rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. What about the employees' pensions? They were going to get wiped out in the sale. We'll secure them, Evelyn assured him. That's now our priority. She turned to Adrian. I need you for one more step, she said. The board wants to call a company-wide meeting. They want someone trustworthy to explain what happened, what we're doing to fix it. For a moment, Adrian's stomach dropped. Me. You're the only one people trust, Evelyn said simply. And after everything you've endured, they deserve to hear the truth from the man who protected them. Adrian felt heat rise in his chest. Honor, fear, responsibility. He nodded. I'll do it. Evelyn gave a rare, small smile. Good. She stood. One more thing. The room fell quiet. The board is also voting on interim leadership. We need someone who understands the company, who has integrity, who won't be influenced by shareholders or family ties. She paused. We want you to step in as interim CEO. Adrian's breath stilled. Marcus looked stunned. Jordan exhaled softly. Even the legal consultants exchanged glances. Adrian cleared his throat. I don't know if I'm the right person. After everything that's happened, you are, Evelyn said firmly. You proved it, and this company needs stability, needs someone who won't weaponize power. Adrian sat back, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle over him like a heavy coat. He thought about Gregory, weak, vulnerable, still unaware of the full betrayal. He thought about Serena, broken, trying to rebuild, trying to choose truth. He thought about the employees terrified, exhausted, desperate for trust. And he thought about himself, the man who had walked out of this building with nothing but a cardboard box and a hard drive no one else knew mattered. He had every reason to say no. He'd been humiliated here, betrayed here, destroyed here. But he also had every reason to say yes, because the company deserved better. Gregory deserved better. Even Serena, in her flawed humanity, deserved a second chance to stand in the light instead of the shadows her sister forced her into. Adrian inhaled deeply. I'll do it, he said. Evelyn nodded once. Then let's begin. As they dispersed, Adrian lingered in the empty room for a moment, staring out at the skyline of Brighton Falls. The sun was rising, casting long beams of light across the city, illuminating rooftops and streets and the glass facade of Aurora Plaza. He felt something inside him, settle something that had been shaking for weeks. He wasn't done healing. He wasn't done fighting. He wasn't done rebuilding. But he was no longer a man pushed out of his own life. He was a man stepping back into it fully, fiercely, on his own terms. And the storm that once consumed him, he was learning to walk through it. One step at a time, the day of the full board meeting arrived like a quiet earthquake, no dramatic thunder, no roaring winds, just a heavy pressure humming beneath the surface of Helio Vantage. The halls of Aurora Plaza buzzed with restrained tension. Employees moved quickly, whispering rumors that darted from cubicle to cubicle like sparks, that Tessa had been removed, that Victor Lang had vanished, that the company was stabilizing, whatever that meant. But beneath all the speculation, one truth lingered. Something massive was about to happen, and everyone could feel it, even if they didn't understand it. Adrian stepped into the building, wearing a charcoal suit he hadn't worn since the day he was fired. The last time he walked these floors, security escorted him out like a criminal. Today, employees paused and stared not with confusion or fear, but with cautious hope. Some nodded, some whispered. Some offered small smiles that said, "We heard what you did," without speaking the words aloud. He nodded back. It wasn't victory, he felt it was responsibility. As he reached the 22nd floor, he paused outside the Horizon conference room. The glass walls reflected a face he barely recognized. Stronger, steadier, scarred but resolute. A man who had been broken and rebuilt himself piece by piece. Inside, the board members were already assembling. Evelyn Stone stood near the head of the table, reviewing documents. Howard Kane murmured quietly with legal counsel. A few others took their seats with anxious expressions. And then there was Serena. She sat alone near the middle of the long table, her hands clasped tightly, her posture tense and uncertain. Her eyes flicked up when Adrian entered. And for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people, bound by history, pain, and a truth too heavy for words. Adrian gave her a small nod. She exhaled, shoulders loosening just slightly. Across the room, a screen displayed the title of the meeting, Strategic Transparency Session, Company Future and Governance. It was a sterile name for what would soon become the most consequential meeting Helio Vantage had ever held. Evelyn motioned to him. "Adrian," she said quietly, "when we begin, I'll introduce the findings. You'll follow. Keep your presentation factual, clear, unemotional. The board needs to trust the truth. Not just your experience of it. I understand. And," she added gently, "Serena may speak, or she may stay silent. Do not rely on her." Adrian nodded again, though something in his chest tightened. "I won't." As they prepared, the last few participants entered the room. When everyone was seated, Evelyn stood, her posture commanding. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," she began. "What we discuss today will determine the future of this company. We will proceed with utmost seriousness." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. Evelyn continued, "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the absence of two individuals, Tessa Ward and Victor Lang. Due to ongoing legal scrutiny, they are not permitted to attend. Their interests, legal teams have assured us, will be represented in writing at a later date." Disapproval rippled quietly across the table. Evelyn didn't pause. "What you are about to hear may be difficult, but it is necessary, and it concerns the stability, ethics, and governance of Helio Vantage." She turned toward Adrian. "With your permission, I'd like to yield the floor to the person who brought the truth to light." The room held its breath as Adrian stood. He walked to the front of the room with measured steps, each one echoing softly against the polished floors. When he faced the board, he felt their eyes on him, some wary, some sympathetic, some simply exhausted. "Thank you," Adrian began, voice steady. "I'm here today because what happened to me wasn't just personal. It wasn't just the collapse of a marriage or a professional setback. It was the symptom of something far more dangerous, a pattern of deception that nearly destroyed this company." He clicked to the first slide. Manipulated operational data Northwind shipment timeline. Adrian detailed how the logs were altered, how false delays were manufactured, how Jonah Briggs had been silenced. He presented visuals showing the original timestamps versus the modified ones. No dramatic language, only facts that spoke louder than any accusation could. Next slide. Financial misconduct toward strategic partners. He walked them through the shell companies, the disguised payments, the siphoned consulting fees. Marcus's financial analysis appeared on the screen, damning, precise. Then, coercion, off-record meetings. Jordan's photographs appeared. Serena's meetings with Victor, the timestamps, the context, the patterns. Adrian didn't look at her as he explained. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room could feel the tension crackling. He didn't gloss over anything. He didn't protect anyone except the truth. And when he finally paused, the silence in the room was absolute. Adrian continued, "This was not an accident. It was not incompetence. It was a coordinated strategy to destabilize leadership, remove oversight, and force a sale that would have gutted Heliovantage from the inside." He took a breath. Tessa orchestrated the scheme. Victor financed it. Serena. He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. It was manipulated into compliance, but she did not participate in falsifying data or financial misconduct. He didn't look at her, but he felt the weight of her breathless relief. When he finished, Evelyn stepped forward. "Thank you, Adrian," she said. "What you've demonstrated is profoundly concerning, and now the board must determine the path forward." She turned to the group, her gaze firm. "We have 3 matters requiring immediate vote. Removal of Tessa Ward from all executive and board capacities. Termination of any partnership negotiations with Victor Lang. Appointment of interim leadership." Before she could continue, a voice spoke. "Evelyn," Serena said softly, standing. The board turned to her in surprise. She seemed pale, but determined. "I'd like to say something." Evelyn nodded and stepped aside. Serena walked slowly toward the center of the room, her voice trembling slightly, but clear. "I failed," she said simply. "As a leader, as a daughter, as a wife." Her words struck the room like a confession in a cathedral. "I let fear consume me. I let my sister influence me. I believed the wrong people. And in doing so, I hurt the one person who ever wanted this company to succeed without conditions." Her throat tightened. "I cannot undo what I've done, but I can take responsibility for it. And I can choose a path that protects my father's legacy instead of distorting it." She faced the board with a posture that hurt to watch, strong, broken, honest. "I support the removal of my sister. I support the termination of Victor Lang's proposal. And I support the board's decision regarding interim leadership, whatever it may be." Her courage cracked open something in the room, something like empathy, or forgiveness, or something softer. Evelyn stepped back to the head of the table. "The board will now vote." The votes were unanimous. Tessa was officially removed. Victor's dealings were terminated. The company would pursue full legal action against both. Then came the final vote. Evelyn looked at Adrian. "For the position of interim CEO," she announced, "we nominate Adrian Locke." Adrian felt his breath catch. There was a moment of stillness, then the board raised their hands, one after another, unanimous again. He closed his eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in profound, quiet acceptance. When he met Serena's gaze across the room, she gave him a fragile nod, one filled with regret, but also hope. Not for reconciliation, not yet, but for healing, for truth, for the future. Adrian exhaled slowly. He had walked back into the same room where his life had been dismantled, and this time, he walked out, not as the man they tried to destroy, but as the man who saved everything they almost lost. The days following the explosive board meeting were unlike anything Heliovantage had ever experienced. There was no celebration, no triumphal speeches, no public gloating. Instead, the building pulsed with a kind of cautious awe, as though the entire company had stumbled to the edge of a cliff, looked down, and only then understood how close they'd come to losing everything. Everyone walked a little slower, spoke a little softer, thought a little deeper. And at the center of the quiet storm stood Adrian Locke, interim CEO, protector of a legacy that had nearly slipped into the hands of corruption, and a man still carrying the wounds of betrayal like bruises beneath a neatly pressed shirt. He didn't revel in his new title. He didn't even put it on his office door. Instead, he spent his first few days rebuilding trust, meeting with department heads individually, reassuring anxious employees, ensuring the pension fund was protected, and reinforcing ethical safeguards in every system Tessa had infiltrated. The company didn't need a king, it needed a guardian. Adrian became exactly that. But while the business slowly regained its balance, his personal life remained fractured in ways no spreadsheet could mend. His interactions with Serena were civil, but fragile, like porcelain that had been shattered and glued back together. The cracks still painfully visible, she kept a respectful distance, working from a smaller office on the 10th floor, quietly performing tasks Evelyn assigned her. No more private meetings in corners. No more whispers behind closed doors. Just a woman trying, tentatively, to rebuild her integrity from the ground up. Their paths crossed occasionally, in hallways, in team updates, during full staff briefings. Each encounter left something unspoken in its wake. One evening, after a 12-hour day filled with crisis communications and restructuring plans, Adrian found himself standing alone in Gregory's old office on the top floor. The faint scent of cedar from the wooden shelves still lingered. Gregory's books remained untouched. His framed achievements lined the walls like ghosts of better days. Adrian didn't know why he came here. Maybe he needed guidance from a man who used to give it freely. Maybe he needed silence. Maybe he needed closure. He rested a hand on Gregory's desk. "You trusted the wrong people," he murmured, "but I hope you'd be proud of what we're trying to fix." A quiet voice answered from the doorway. He would. Adrian turned. Serena stood there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes shimmering with something between sadness and resolve. "I didn't know anyone else came up here," she said softly. "I needed to think," Adrian replied. Serena stepped inside slowly, as though crossing a threshold she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter. "I talked to Dad today," she said. "I didn't tell him everything, just enough to prepare him for the investigation. He cried. "Adrian." "I've never seen him cry," Adrian exhaled. "He deserved the truth." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know. And I'm the one who should have given it to him, not you." "You did what you thought was right," Adrian said gently. "Fear clouds judgment. It happens." "That's not an excuse," Serena whispered. "Not for what I did to you." A heavy silence followed. Serena moved closer, then stopped a few steps away, as though afraid to breach invisible boundaries. "I want you to know," she said with trembling conviction, "that I'm cooperating fully with the investigation. I'm telling the board everything I knew and everything I should have questioned sooner." Adrian nodded. "That's the right thing. I also stepped down from my executive role." Adrian turned to look at her, startled. "You did?" She nodded. "I can't lead right now. I need to earn trust back." "And not demand it." Evelyn agreed to let me take a transitional advisory role, non-decision making. "It's what I deserve." Adrian felt a strange mix of sadness and respect. Serena was finally choosing accountability over pride. It didn't erase the wounds, but it mattered. Serena's voice softened. "Adrian, I want you to know something. Before the board meeting, before I spoke, I almost stayed silent again. I almost let fear win. But you didn't," he said. "No," she whispered, "because you showed me the truth about Tessa, about Victor, about myself. You forced me to see what I'd become and what I was letting myself be shaped into." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Adrian. Not for losing the company, not for putting the board at risk, but for breaking us, for breaking you." He closed his eyes, the confession cutting deeper than he expected. "I trusted you more than anyone. he said quietly. Serena flinched. And I trusted Tessa more than I trusted you, she whispered. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. The room grew unbearably still. Serena wiped her tears. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want to make something clear. I will never stand against you again. Not in business, not in life. If there's ever a time you need my voice, my support, my honesty, I'm yours to call. Her words trembled but were honest. Adrian breathed deeply. Serena, I don't know where we go from here. I don't know if we can rebuild anything. Everything feels different. I know, she whispered. But I'm not angry anymore, he added. Just tired, and hoping you find your way back to yourself. She nodded, tears falling freely now. I'm trying. Every day. They stood in the quiet of Gregory's office, surrounded by years of memories and the weight of everything left unsaid. The moment could have broken them further. Instead, it softened something. Not enough to heal, but enough to breathe. After a long silence, Serena stepped back toward the door. Adrian, she said softly, I'm proud of you. What you did, not many people could have done. He didn't respond, but they exchanged one final look, an acknowledgement of the road behind them and the uncertain path ahead. Serena left quietly. Adrian remained for a moment longer, absorbing the stillness. He wasn't healed. She wasn't forgiven. But something had shifted. They weren't enemies anymore. They were two people learning how to stand again after the ground gave way. Later that night, Adrian met with Evelyn to finalize preparations for the company-wide gathering. She reviewed the structure meticulously, ensuring the truth would be told without inducing panic. Tomorrow, she said, you address everyone, not as a victim, not as someone returning, but as a leader. I'll do my best, Adrian replied. I know, Evelyn said. That's why we chose you. As he walked out of her office, a strange stillness settled over him, a quiet acceptance of the role he never sought, but now carried with integrity. He glanced once more at the Heliovantage logo on the lobby wall, a symbol built on trust, nearly destroyed by greed, now held together by truth. Adrian exhaled. The reckoning was done, but the rebuilding, that was just beginning. The morning of the company-wide gathering was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made the air feel thin and the city seem quieter than it should be. Adrian arrived at Aurora Plaza before sunrise, long before employees began filing in. He stood outside the building for a while, hands in his pockets, watching the faint glow of dawn reflect off the glass tower. This was the same place where he had once been humiliated, marched out like a disgraced outsider. With a cardboard box in his hands, the memory lingered, but its weight felt different now. Not lighter, just transformed. It no longer burned with shame. It pulsed with resolve. Inside, the auditorium on the ground floor had been transformed into a sea of chairs, facing a simple stage. No banners, no glossy graphics, no triumphant slogans. Just a plain podium and a screen displaying the Heliovantage logo. Sturdy, unbroken, familiar, slowly. Employees filled the room, faces tired, anxious, curious. Many had heard fragments of what happened, but not the full truth. Some still feared instability. Others felt betrayed, unsure who to trust. Whispers drifted through the air like dust motes in sunlight. Adrian waited behind the curtain. Scanning the crowd, he spotted Jonah sitting near the back, still nervous but hopeful. Jordan, arms crossed, a quiet guardian in his own right. Priya, somber, her expression a mixture of guilt and relief. Marcus had flown in that morning, seated with the consultants. And then he saw Serena. She sat alone in the middle row, hands clasped neatly in her lap, posture tense. Her presence mattered not because it changed the past, but because it signaled something: accountability, humility, courage. As Evelyn stepped up to the podium to open the meeting, Adrian took a deep breath. He had faced the board. He had faced Tessa. He had faced the truth. Now he had to face the people whose livelihoods depended on the company he was now responsible for. Evelyn began, her voice steady. Thank you for being here. Today is about clarity, safety, and rebuilding. It is about truth. She didn't point fingers. She didn't dramatize. She didn't weaponize information. She simply delivered a clear, factual summary of the recent events and the company's immediate steps. The suspension and investigation of Tessa Ward, the severing of ties with Victor Lang, the restoration of financial safeguards, and the commitment to transparency. When she finished, she gestured toward Adrian. The room shifted as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Adrian stepped forward. The moment he appeared, the whispers died instantly. A stillness fell that was almost reverent. Everyone waited, not just for answers, but for a sense of direction. He placed his hands on the podium, grounding himself. Good morning, he said quietly. Thank you for being here. I know this has been a difficult time. Rumors, confusion, fear, those things grow fast in silence. Today, I want to end that silence. He paused, scanning the room. When I was escorted out of this building weeks ago, I felt like I'd failed you, failed Gregory, failed the company. I thought I had lost everything, but what I didn't lose was the truth, he continued, voice steady but full of depth. The instability you've been feeling wasn't caused by operational mistakes. It wasn't caused by a failing business. It was caused by people who manipulated information to serve their own agenda. People who wanted to sell this company from under you. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. This company belongs to its employees as much as to its board. Your hard work built it. Your commitment carried it through crisis. You deserved honesty, and you did not get it. He paused to let that land. What I can promise you now is this. The people responsible are gone. The systems they manipulated are being rebuilt. Your pensions, your contracts, your stability, they are safe. And moving forward, Helio Vantage will operate under stronger oversight than ever before. He straightened, the weight of leadership settling fully onto him. I didn't ask for this role, but I accepted it because I believe in this company, I believe in its mission, and I believe in every single person sitting in this room. The room was silent, utterly silent. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about responsibility, about protecting what matters. And from this moment forward, every decision we make will be rooted in transparency, accountability, and integrity. He took a breath. I can't promise there won't be challenges, but I can promise we face them together, as a team, as a company, as people who refuse to let corruption define who we are. A murmur of agreement spread across the room, growing louder. Adrian gave a small nod. Thank you. The floor is open for questions. Hands shot up, fearful, hopeful, curious. Adrian answered every question honestly, clearly, without defensiveness. Employees asked about operations, stability, legal actions, pensions, leadership. He addressed every concern with the calm confidence of someone who'd already survived the worst. By the end of the session, the atmosphere had shifted. Shoulders that entered the room tense now relaxed. People talked more openly. Some even smiled. Trust, fractured, fragile, but real, had begun to mend. That afternoon, Adrian walked through the building with a lighter step. Employees approached him with gratitude, reassurance, even quiet admiration, but he didn't let the praise get to him. He wasn't seeking validation, only restoration. He visited each department, offering transparency and direction. He met with IT to reinforce security protocols. He reviewed financials with Marcus. He stopped by the logistics team to thank them for holding steady through the class turmoil. And somewhere in the calm between meetings, he found himself in the small executive lounge overlooking the city. That's where Serena found him. She stepped in quietly. I watched your speech, she said softly. Adrian nodded. You should have been part of it. You helped expose what needed exposing. Serena shook her head. I helped cause it, and I'm still learning how to undo that. She hesitated, then continued, but what you did today, it was more than leadership, it was healing. He didn't respond immediately. She moved closer, stopping a safe distance from him. I don't expect forgiveness, Adrian. I don't even expect a future together. But I want you to know this. You reminded me of the man I fell in love with, not because you were strong, but because you were kind. The words hit him harder than he expected. After a moment, he said quietly, I'm still hurt, and I don't know what the future looks like. I know, Serena whispered, and I'm not asking for anything, just thank you for everything. She turned to leave. Serena, Adrian called gently. She paused. I'm glad you spoke the truth, he said, no matter what happens next. Her eyes softened. She nodded and left the room with a quiet grace that felt different from before, lighter, freer. Weeks passed. Investigations progressed. Tessa faced mounting legal consequences. Victor vanished from the corporate scene entirely. Employees stabilized. The company's reputation slowly restored itself. Heliovantage wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was alive. Adrian, after fulfilling his role as interim CEO with diligence and compassion, it made one final decision. He would step down once the company was fully stabilized. Not out of defeat, but out of evolution. He had fought the hardest battle of his life, not for power, but for truth. And now he wanted to build something new, something entirely his own. On his last day, he stood outside Aurora Plaza again. Watching the sun dip behind the skyline, he looked up at the building, not with resentment, not with longing, but with gratitude. This place had broken him, and this place had rebuilt him, not as the man he once was, but as the man he was meant to become. He exhaled softly, stepped away from the glass tower, and walked toward a future that finally felt like it belonged to him. Behind him, Heliovantage stood strong because truth had saved it, and ahead of him, a new beginning, one he had earned with every scar. In the end, Adrian's journey reminds us that betrayal doesn't define us. Our response to it does. Sometimes the people we trust most will falter, and sometimes the world we build can collapse overnight. But even in those moments, truth has a quiet strength that outlasts manipulation, fear, and ambition. Adrian chose integrity when revenge would have been easier. He chose to rebuild instead of retaliate, and in doing so, he proved that healing isn't about returning to who we were, but becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Adrian's place? And if you enjoy powerful stories about resilience, forgiveness, and personal victory, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.